Hello everyone. You've likely heard many say that Bitcoin can never truly be money, haven't you? I'm sure many of you watching probably feel the same way. However, humanity has used diverse forms of currency. Seashells, stones, gold, silver, cigarettes, whiskey, high-quality paper. By looking at these previously used currencies, we can contemplate what the fundamental nature of money truly is. Commodity money, such as cigarettes or whiskey, is typically employed in specific situations, like within prisons or during wartime. For South Korean men, cigarettes are often distributed in the military. So non-smokers all have experience trading those cigarettes for other things, making them very familiar with the concept of cigarettes being used as currency. Things with inherent value, like cigarettes, are termed commodity money. Commodity money naturally aligns with our human intuition, so a separate justification isn't really necessary, is it? Let me ask you a question. Try to guess the answer. Imagine there's an island. Let's say it's an isolated island. On that island, by some coincidence, they started using cigarettes as currency, and of course, there were smokers. However, as the idea that smoking is unhealthy spread, the young people on the island began to quit smoking. Eventually, not a single person who smoked was left on the island. On this island, will the tobacco currency still be used as money? Or since there are no smokers, does it no longer have any value? So, will the price of the cigarettes used as currency plummet? Since I've already asked one question, let me ask one more. Whether the government recognizes it or not, everyone in the world knows that gold is money. Yes, no one would throw away gold if you gave it to them. That's the proof. Back when the internet was first emerging, an early payment system known as e-gold launched in 1994. E-gold didn't ship gold to customers when they bought it, they just kept it in their vaults and gave customers a gold account instead. So customers use these gold accounts for online payments and small transactions. But now, e-gold doesn't exist anymore. Why is that? The US government arrested the head of e-gold, shut down the company's servers, and froze its assets, meaning the customer's gold. Naturally, the company went bankrupt and was forcibly liquidated. Now here's the question. Let's say e-gold didn't store its gold in Dubai or the US, but on the moon, yes, on the moon, and everything else stays the same, including the gold accounts. Let's say everyone knows their gold is really stored in a vault on the moon, but of course no one can actually get it back. You can't go to the moon. But there's also a good side. Government agencies like the FBI can't go there either, so they can't freeze it. If such a system were built, would it be used as a payment method like e-gold? Yes, it's quite puzzling, isn't it? Okay, the answer to both the first and second questions is yes. The cigarettes on the island with no smokers would continue to be used as currency. And yes, the gold accounts on the moon would also continue to be utilized. This particular problem, by the way, was not something I personally devised. This is a concept that was highlighted in a book by a giant in the field of economics, a scholar named Milton Friedman, and I've organized it for you in an easy-to-understand way. In his book on monetary economics, Friedman introduces the stone money of the Yap Islanders. The Yapese people use large, difficult-to-transport stones as their currency. They're not used as pillars or for building, they just stand them awkwardly in front of their homes. However, the truly astonishing part begins now. You see, on this island you can't find granite, these granite stones. So they have to go to a nearby island, carve out the stones, and transport them by boat. But then a storm hits and the boat sinks right as it's approaching the island. The stone they work so hard to get sinks to the bottom of the sea. And yet the stone that sank in the ocean is still used as money. All you need are witnesses to prove that the stone sank while being transported. What Friedman is trying to say is that money is a phenomenon unrelated to usefulness or possession. In this story, Friedman starts talking about gold. That's the point he wanted to make. So, where is gold? It's scattered throughout nature, in small amounts. People work to refine it, making it highly pure. Then they shape it into bricks. And after that, what happens? It's stacked neatly in an underground bunker at the New York Fed, guarded by Marines. It's taken from underground only to be stored underground again. And in his book, Friedman asks us, what's the difference between the stone money of Yap and the gold bars we use today? That gold is never actually used and it's not even moved. So what precisely happens if gold that's in the US is sold to France? They actually use a forklift to move the gold bars within that underground Federal Reserve bunker, simply relocating them right next to their original spot. It then makes front-page news in economic papers like the Wall Street Journal. Gold outflow. Our country has no more gold. The physical gold is still in the US, but because the ownership changed to France, the newspapers report a gold outflow from the US. That's how it works with commodity money like gold. But fiat money, like paper money, only has value because the government recognizes it. If the government doesn't recognize it, you could say it's not money at all. Many economists argue this way, but there's one problem they haven't solved yet. There's a case where paper money not recognized by the government was valued more than government-recognized money, the Swiss dinar. The dinar is Iraq's currency. Do you remember the first Gulf War? In 1990, Iraq's President Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. That's how the war started, with the US joining in. It happened during President George H.W. Bush's time. The Iraqi currency used before that time is called the Swiss dinar. It has nothing to do with Switzerland. The name was likely used to imply that it was trustworthy, like Switzerland. After the war ended, Iraq faced economic sanctions. The Swiss dinar was made in a British printing factory using special ink, and Iraq used to import it. But after the sanctions, they couldn't import it anymore. So the Iraqi government carried out a currency reform. So they demonetized the Swiss dinar and replaced it with a new currency. This new one was reportedly made locally with Chinese printers and regular ink. The Iraqi government, after a certain time, outlawed the Swiss dinar that had been in circulation, and as expected, they stopped exchanging it. Yet, the Iraqi populace actually preferred the Swiss dinar over the new dinar printed on Chinese machines and recognized by the state. That's why they called it the Swiss dinar, even though it had nothing to do with Switzerland. It was very actively used, particularly by the Kurds residing in northern Iraq. Surprisingly, it featured the face of President Hussein, the Kurds' enemy, even on the Swiss dinar. In fact, right up until the Second Iraq War, this specific Swiss dinar was valued at over 300 times more than the currency the government was haphazardly issuing. Of course, after the Second Iraq War, which was initiated by President George W. Bush, the newly established government exchanged all of the Swiss dinars and the old dinars for entirely new currency, so the Swiss dinar is now obsolete. So what exactly does this mean? Something can become currency even if it has no practical use, like cigarettes, isn't recognized by a government, or is at the ocean's bottom, right? So what exactly is money anyway? All right, I'm going to be audacious and tell you the conclusion right away. Money is a ledger. And what about things like credit cards, debit cards, and online banking? Aren't they essentially just ledgers on a bank server? They are ledgers. For a very long time, humanity has actually understood that money is fundamentally a ledger. Just think about it. When the Nile River flooded, people needed to confirm land ownership. This was my land, that yours. After a flood, boundaries blurred. Who would they go to? Well, then the farmers would head over to the land registry office. And that registry office is where the land ledger is managed, right? So the world managed by clerks handling ledgers became far more important than the world dealing with actual land or wine stored in real warehouses. That's why a good ledger must never be altered carelessly, and it was always kept in a central place. Therefore, access to the ledger was limited to a small group of elites. So, naturally, not just anyone could be a scribe who recorded information related to taxes or land registration. Graffiti has been found in ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamian schools. If you observe, teachers would compel students to memorize various things and then physically punish them if they failed to recall them. Why was that? Because schools were places that trained scribes to record the nation's documents, that is, the ledgers. Students were often beaten because records had to be handled with extreme strictness. They had to memorize and avoid errors. Even if you have an excellent memory, if the numbers on your bank account statement are altered in any way, your actual bank balance has in fact been changed. Since people couldn't just copy ledgers and store them in virtual spaces like the metaverse, they had to carry those numbers or turn them into something physical and easy to trade or move around. So in the past, our ancestors knew that money was basically a ledger. But since they couldn't keep identical ledgers in a virtual space like we can now, they kept one central ledger and turned the numbers into something physical. And what was that physical thing? This may seem like sophistry, I know, but please listen a bit more. The thing we call currency. Because it represents numbers on a special ledger, currency materials have specific properties. What kind? First, they must not spoil. This is why foods, other than rice or long-lasting grains, aren't suitable for use as currency. Secondly, the lighter it is, the better. Third, it needs to be divisible. It must be easily divided because calculation needs to be simple. That's why assets with value as a complete indivisible unit, such as a house, are not suitable for use as currency. Because the value of a house isn't simply double the value of half a house. If you cut a house in half, it basically loses its value. Now, the fourth concept is a bit tricky. It's called fungibility. It's closely related to the idea of something being divisible. The separate, divided components, if they are of equivalent value, should, in principle, be interchangeable. What exactly do I mean by this, everyone? When you go to the bank to get crisp Shinsaimdang bills for New Year's gift money, they seem different from the crumpled Shinsaimdang bills stuffed in your wallet, but their value is exactly the same. This is called fungibility. Fifth, money must be scarce. Now think about it. All 5 of these traits are actually connected to the numbers recorded in a ledger. These aren't physical attributes, but rather properties inherent in numbers. For ledger numbers not to proliferate uncontrollably, scarcity is required. So, in reality, there's still no material that perfectly matches these 5 properties. But there's something that closely matches these 5 traits. You all know what it is, right? Yes, metal specifically, gold. Gold doesn't rust. It's also lightweight. It's divisible, and its physical attributes are basically the same, so it's interchangeable. It's fungible. Plus, it's scarce. So, do you now understand why humanity has used gold as money for such a long time? That's because gold is the closest thing to an abstract number. However, gold does have one critical issue. It's hard for ordinary people to accurately divide or assess gold's purity. So who stepped in to solve this problem? Yes, the government, and that's where the sad history of gold begins. First, gold is used for exchange because it can represent good ledger numbers. But it's easy to be deceived. People can cheat on the purity, so the government first creates a standard gold coin. They stamp the emperor's seal right on it. That gold coin earns market trust due to its uniform weight and content. Private gold coins existed, but government coins drove them out. They gained a competitive edge. People trust it precisely because it comes from the government. Then, the government begins to monopolize the minting of gold coins, and as a result, the government becomes avaricious. What do they do next? They begin to reduce the gold content. Eventually, gold becomes entirely controlled by the government. The government issues currency with little gold, yet equal to gold coins. They just assign numbers. Eventually, they even prohibit citizens from owning or trading gold. And why is that? Because their own counterfeit gold coins have to circulate, right? Friedrich Hayek, a libertarian economist, knew that gold could never escape government control. So he said that a clever new technology would be needed to get around the government. Milton Friedman, an economist I mentioned earlier, who actually outlived Hayek and got to witness the early days of the internet, once said this. He predicted the rise of a payment system that could move from computer to computer money that the government couldn't control, unlike gold or fiat currency. A payment that moves directly from computer to computer. What is it? Because Milton Friedman was a genius, he foresaw something like Bitcoin even before he saw it. We've studied money's material properties: durability, divisibility, portability, fungibility, and scarcity. The money that perfectly embodies these is, surprisingly, it must be mathematical. Bitcoin is mathematical money. More and more people are now realizing that the true nature of money isn't about physical objects, it's about ledgers. But here's the thing, not all ledgers are equally good. To ensure an accurate ledger, a nation picks and rigorously trains elites. These skilled individuals use their excellent memory to precisely record entries, guaranteeing no errors. This record cannot be arbitrarily changed. However, a ledger that cannot be adjusted at all would also be problematic. Well, with Bitcoin, it's a ledger that no one can alter unless it's a legitimate transaction, so there's no need to place trust in the elite. Given that, who would truly dislike Bitcoin? The elites dislike it, yes. That's why Bitcoin doesn't rely on trust in elites. It's a form of trustless trust credit without relying on trust. The destinies of individuals who realize that the perfect form of currency must inherently be mathematical, more precisely, a mathematical ledger impervious to arbitrary changes, and those who didn't, have dramatically diverged over the last 10 years. What our ancestors realized was that money is a ledger, and since they couldn't copy the ledger into a virtual space like the metaverse, they had to turn it into something physical. But if you carefully study the qualities that physical money needed, you'll realize they can actually be perfectly represented by abstract numbers. Bitcoin is a ledger and mathematics. Yes, that concludes today's lecture. Thank you.